Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian. I am here today at the James D. Julia Auction House up in Maine, and I'm taking a look at some of the guns that are coming up for sale in their March of 2016 auction. And the one I have here in front of me today is really quite a remarkable piece of unique firearms history. So this dates to the Civil War, and more specifically Texas during the Civil War. It may be a stereotype, but one might say that Texans are always kind of doing their own thing and trying to do it bigger and better than everyone else. Well, this is kind of a good example of that. This is a revolver made in the small town or settlement of Sisterdale, Texas, by actually a group of German immigrants. So the story goes back to 1849 when a fellow named Dr. Ernest Kapp emigrated to the United States from Minden in Germany. He was a doctor. There'd been some political unrest, wasn't a good place, decided to leave, and he moved to Texas, where Sisterdale was actually kind of an established German community. So a lot of other German immigrants already there. He joined in, and it didn't take long for him to kind of become one of the pillars of society. After about 10 years, of course, the Civil War breaks out. He ends up being assigned recruiting officer for the area. Texas, of course, is under martial law. Texas is part of the Confederacy, and various Confederate military units are conscripted and or recruited in the area, and Kapp's son happens to be in one of them, Company F of his local forces. And here's the problem. They didn't, in rural Texas, supplies, arms are kind of an issue. There wasn't any real serious fighting going on in Texas related to the Civil War. This wasn't Virginia or Georgia. We didn't have major battles going on. It was kind of the outskirts of the war. Well, Kapp they're having some trouble getting arms and equipment, and Kapp's son, Alfred, happens to have he'd spent some time traveling on the east coast of the U.S., and actually, for a short time, worked for the Colt Company in Hartford, where he had gained some experience in manufacturing and handguns. Well, what should he do? He gets the good idea that, by gosh, if he can't get guns for his men, well, they'll make guns. And his plan was to make guns not just for his own use, but to attempt to sell them to the state of Texas, as far as we can tell. Now, the documentation on this story is largely based on a series of letters that remained in the family, which did do a remarkably good job of documenting the process of what was going on with these guys. A small group of men, Kapp and now this would be Alfred Kapp, the son, and a number of his compatriots, and also this kind of mysterious German blacksmith figure who's alternatively named either Schmidt Wilhelm or Wilhelm Schmidt. The documentation is really quite unclear as to which order his name is supposed to go in. At any rate, he is a quite skilled blacksmith. Alfred Kapp has this experience working for Colt making handguns, and between the two of them, they set up to start making revolvers. So there's no official name for this because they only managed to make 6 of them in total, and this, as far as we know, is the only surviving example. So it's typically called a Sisterdale revolver. And it shares features of a number of different guns. It's got a solid frame, unlike a Colt, but then it has external controls for positioning the cylinder, which we'll take a look at in a moment. It's a 7.5-inch barrel. It's .44 caliber, so this is an Army caliber pistol. And apparently, at least 1 or 2 of the guns that they planned to make or did make were Navy caliber guns, so .36 caliber. The plan was to make 6 and take them to San Antonio and try to interest the Texas government in them. Whether that actually happened or not, we really don't know. As I said, this is the only surviving example, which remained in the Kapp family until it appears like the 1950s is when it was originally started being documented. So really, literally a totally unique revolver. It's got elements of a lot of different things in it, clearly someone's creative effort. So why don't we go ahead and bring the camera back and take a closer look at all the rather unusual and cool features of this thing. All right, so to start out, of course, this is not a duplicate of any existing pattern of revolver. There are a number of things we can see in it and some interesting little quirks to the story that we can get from the Kapp family letters. For one thing, this is a machined frame. According to the letters, they actually initially planned to cast frames, probably out of bronze, But apparently they made the molds and they were too impatient to let the molds dry long enough to to make good castings. It must have been rather humid at the time. They mentioned it would have taken several days for these molds to dry, and they tried a couple, and every time, you know, the molds weren't quite ready, and they ended up with bad castings. And finally, someone suggested, look, let's just mill this thing out of a block, and that did in fact work much better for them. So, milled frame here. You can see obviously the barrel's threaded in. I mentioned external controls. Two of the things that you have to do on a revolver are, well, in order to control the rotation of the cylinder, you typically need a hand and a stop. And the idea is when you cock the hammer, the hand pushes on a ratchet on the back of the cylinder, which rotates it, and then the stop locks it in place so that the cylinder and the barrel are lined up when you're ready to fire. Typically, these controls are all inside the gun, and usually they're exposed only at the back of the cylinder, inside here, where they won't get messed up, full of dirt, gunk, etc. Well, on this guy, they're both external. So this is the hand. When I cock the hammer, you can see that this little bell crank pushes up on this hand, which rotates the cylinder. And then this spring-loaded piece is the cartridge stop. You can hear it clicking there. It's dropping into these locking notches. So interesting that these controls would both be external on the gun. We also have a rear sight up here, actually on the cartridge stop. Not a particularly good sight. The rear sight notch is substantially smaller than the front sight itself, which would make this a rather difficult gun to aim, but of course that was probably the least of their concerns at this point in manufacture. Unfortunately, at this point, the story of these revolvers kind of goes dry. There doesn't appear to be any formal report or acknowledgement that's been found about these being presented to Texas or what the Texas government may have thought about them, which probably isn't surprising. As cool and as interesting as this project is, and as remarkable of basically, these were produced by a couple of dudes in a blacksmith shop on a farm, which is really quite impressive. However, they are not up to the standards, either in quality or design, of a proper factory-made revolver, and that probably would have been quite clear right off the bat to any ordnance authorities that took a look at them. So when or why exactly these guys stopped working on the guns, we don't know. My guess is they probably ran out of money, had other things that had to get done, and the project probably just languished and ended. But for the time being, we don't know what happened to the other guns that they may have made. This particular one, as I mentioned, stayed in the family, for over 100 years, until it ended up donated to a museum, or loaned to a museum, and then later on the private market. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. It's always interesting to look at, this is a combination of several things. It's a Texas gun, it's a Civil War gun, it's a Confederate gun, it's a unique gun, you name it. Very interesting piece, definitely, and kind of blurs the line between military and handmade. So if you're interested in having this yourself, as I said, it is the only one of its kind known to exist. Check the description text below. You'll find a link to the Julia Auction House catalog page on the gun. You can take a look at their documentation and provenance on it, as well as their high-res pictures. And if you decide you just can't live without it and need to, say, take it back to Texas with you, well, you can come up here rather, to Maine and participate in the auction live, or place a bid online. Thanks for watching.